Good evening. It's currently 9 p.m. and you're listening to the 9 o'clock Meltdown, showcasing favorite and up-and-coming local artists with a relaxed coffee house vibe, plus interviews, live studio performances, and more. It's all here on 91.3 KUWS Superior. Now, here's your host for the evening, Simply C.
Thanks, Forrest, and I'm in the studio this afternoon with Kat Mandeville. I got that last name right, finally. And now you're a poet of the Northland. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course, of course. And now, do you want to start with one of your poets?
Sure. This is from my poetry book, Spider Country. And this poem is called What People Say Right Before Being Thrown Out of a Bar, which happens a lot in Duluth. There are things I've stopped trying to explain to people as beautiful as you. We are here for the secret, which is the hope no one will in fact tell the secret. Someone who finds my seductions uncivil, but erotic, everything else I do. Don't tell Kevin the map of imagination took me 2 days to find you in your own body. I keep shaking, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Her kitchen floor so filthy you'd do anything to lie there all night, and you do. Please put the Polaroid in reverse. You are dying to tell me not to tell you are dying. Of all the seasons, I never went cold on you, Neruda. Don't you remember the old precision, the language that could not speak itself? Private paranoias with the mafia slant, use of personal pronouns from now on prohibited. How do I get to be somebody else? Perhaps we could do this again with another kind of cartilage, say juniper berry, the homeless in Queens. Life is writing poems to someone who doesn't read poetry. A tenuous point of contact, asserting meaningful control. I'll call you.
All right, very cool. Thank you, Kat. And you're listening to 9 o'clock Meltdown here on 91.3 KUWS right here in Superior. It's a little cold out, but it's warmer than it once was. And now we were talking a little bit earlier, and you spent some time in New York. How has that kind of shaped you, and how was that for your writing?
I have several artist friends who live in New York. Several of them are musicians, composers. And this last trip to New York, I worked with my friend Fritz Myers. He works with Platitude Music, and so we recorded the whole book of my new prose poem book, which is called Something is Happening to the Archetypes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very cool. So, how many books do you actually have out?
Just two.
Mm-hmm.
The first, the poetry book, Spider Country, and then the poems, prose, and longer prose. Something is happening to the archetypes.
All right, sounds good. And now we were kind of just talking a little bit earlier about New York again, to just double back. So kind of how did New York kind of compare to Duluth? I mean, was there kind of similar little pockets of artist people, or is it kind of just a modge podge of everybody?
Oh, well, New York has a lot of practice at being efficient. And so instead of going through many encounters with people to find those who understand you best, it was like referral to referral. And so it was these great connections, instant connections, where we were able to have very complex conversations immediately and get to the heart of matters. And I like that about New York.
All right, very cool. So what you're saying is Duluth is kind of more a roundabout way, a little bit.
Yeah, you have to search. And a lot of it is word of mouth, as it is, I suppose, in any city. In terms of proportion, I think there's going to be fewer connections, I suppose.
Right.
So I tend to move around a lot, spend a couple years in one place, and then move. Duluth is the longest place I've been for a long time, probably since I left home at 16 to go to boarding school in Michigan. So it is strange for me to stay in a place and actually dig roots and stick around and live the feedback of your life.
All right. So boarding school, now I can safely say I've never met anyone that's been to boarding school. Now, when you think of boarding school, automatically people think of England or Europe, but there are boarding schools in the U.S., and at 16, was that more of like a high school jump for you, or what was that all about?
Yeah, it's a performing arts school in Traverse City, Michigan. It's called Interlochen Arts Academy. And so you go there and you major in fine arts. There's dance and opera, singing, visual arts, writing, theater, musical theater. Maybe they've added a few more since I've been there. I think film is now a medium there. All
right, very cool. How did that kind of shape you, just kind of being completely submerged in art? I mean, how did that shape you as an artist, and do you see it kind of coming through in your poetry?
Yeah, it was like a radical change for me. I grew up not having a lot of friends, and so whatever art I did, I kept mostly to myself. And I hadn't found really anyone to share it with. And then at 16, I went to this boarding school, which is full of disciplined, crazy, devoted artists, and so I felt like I really blossomed there with students of all different backgrounds and class and interests, and they're all very passionate, and so I found overwhelming resources of inspiration and feedback and connection.
All right, very cool. And now, did you come to Duluth for college, or was it just kind of a place on the map you wanted to go?
I was on my way from Utah to Boston to go to law school.
Oh, all right.
And my brother and sister-in-law live here, and a baby was on the way, so I was going to stop for a few months and kind of help out and be there. And I deferred for a year from law school and was really thinking hard about going into that field, and I decided that the arguments I wanted to make about the world, to the world, in the world, would probably be best made in writing.
Okay.
And in creative writing. So
right.
I stuck around Duluth.
All right, sounds good. And now you've performed a little bit in Homegrown. There's a video out of you. I can't remember if it was last year's Homegrown or previous. And then you've also done some stuff with the Renegade. Obviously, I've done some digging. Some digging. Thank you, Google.
Oh, God.
Don't worry, it's nothing bad. But you've kind of wrapped into Duluth's kind of performing arts area. Now, did it kind of envelop in you to just go out and seek the performing arts, or did the performing arts kind of come to you?
You know, both. I think that's something about an insular community like this, that people hear things, people see things, and they invite you. So I was invited to read my poetry at Homegrown for a couple years. I was also invited to sing, and so I did a little jazz number from Synecdoche, New York soundtrack.
Oh, very cool.
And that was great. And so I've participated in some live music performances imitating singing, and then I decided to start auditioning for plays in town. And so I did some Shakespeare and some Mamet and some Tennessee Williams and some contemporary, and found it very satisfying.
All right, very cool. So it kind of sounds like the performing arts is definitely for you. And Kat, when you told me law school, I was kind of like, okay, I've got this pink-haired, tattooed lady sitting in front of me who wants to go to law school. Interesting, but to each their own.
Yeah, I was Interested in public defense and more specifically litigation and defending juvenile delinquents and children.
Mhm.
And I did some shadowing with guardian ad litem, and that's a really difficult thing. These attorneys have 100 open cases at once, and for me, from what I observed and experienced, the system was so broken that it would probably break me
Oh, okay.
trying to participate.
Mm.
So I guess in a way I kind of was a coward about that.
Well, to each their own, and you have to know your own strengths and what you're good at. So, applause for shadowing and then realizing, that it wasn't for you before you went too deep down the rabbit hole, I guess. So.
I do think I'd like to take opportunities to be a kind of litigator in situations, which is great for the stage, and also translating that into poetry, and taking a perspective and being persuasive, I guess.
All right. And now let's jump back a little bit again. When you went to your performing arts academy, if I may call it that, did you really kind of focus on poetry? Was that your main goal? Like you knew you wanted to be a poet since you got there, or did it kind of come out in different forms?
Well, I went to Interlochen Arts Academy and then to Carnegie Mellon, and in both I studied theater.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was at both, I took classes in poetry and poetry workshop.
Oh, okay.
Which was infinitely inspiring and useful.
Mm-hmm.
In the workshops, I learned not just how to receive criticism, but how to give it as well, how to look at a poem and look beyond the poem and what the poem is trying to be. And there's a growing trend of, in terms of criticism of art, and what I liked about the workshops is that when you read a poem, you're not allowed to speak after that. And the class critiques it with the teacher, and the conversation is between the other poets in the room, and you take notes, and really you only speak up if it's an issue of like a typo, but maybe not even then. And I like this idea because the art is doing its work then, and the artist is letting the art speak for itself and trusting that it's saying something. And that seems to be changing in the world of discourse in art. I find it kind of disturbing where artists are made to defend their artwork, usually orally, like in oral form. And it's this kind of growing paranoia about artwork, and that it isn't doing what it should be doing. And maybe it isn't, but these forms of defense seem kind of demeaning to the artwork. And so I often long for these forms of workshop where we trust in the art to do something and for the critics to battle it out. But I was pretty young when I got into poetry. I was quite obsessed with wolves growing up, and I closely identified with them, and so I looked up poems on wolves, and I began memorizing them. And I think if you read enough poetry, you begin to think in poetry, and then you begin to write it, and that was my way in.
All right. Very cool. A very cool story behind that. And now, just to kind of something that you said, that you feel kind of like artists have to defend their artwork. Do you feel it's because people don't understand artwork like they once did, or is it because the artwork is becoming so open to interpretation?
I think it's the understanding of art itself and how it functions, and it's changing, certainly in this kind of late capitalist economy where art is immediately economized. And so there's a value that's placed on it, and a lot of artists are immediately attuned to its market value. And so maybe there is this feeling of panic to defend the art, to defend its place, its stature and status in the world. And I think that's a great disservice to art, to the specific art that's being defended, to the artist, putting them in the wrong place, I think.
Right. All right. Do you have another poem for us? I was
Yeah.
going to say poetry, but that's what you're doing.
Sure. This will also be from Spider Country, and this one is called Rumpelstiltskin. She was long and fragile, a pinch of straw. He was low and round, like a spinning wheel. At the dinner parties, she moved through rooms like candlelight, gossamer bringing shadows, while he sat, red-faced with men at the table boasting of his published books on Frankfurt folklore. "Are those your wife's stories?" the men would ask. "Nah, she's just a rustic bumpkin," he would say, watching her with worry, as if she were a gun in a nightstand drawer, closer to the intruder. From the grove of women, she looked back at him and flickered. The story goes they met at a costume affair, she a peasant sulking in a stairwell, and he dressed as a gnome. Her German accent, soggy with bathtub gin, sloshed at Slavic names to rival his dark features, as he stood sober in a burlap grin, admiring her linen. I passed them by on my way to leave, disguised as a firstborn child, and saw his finger in her mouth, drawing out a line of spittle, golden, endless. "You could make me a fortune," he was whispering. "You could make me beg."
All right, another poem by Kat Mandeville. She's in the studio with me this afternoon. This is the 9 o'clock Meltdown, and I'm your host, Simply C. So, very cool poem, Rumpelstiltskin. So, is that kind of your interpretation on the story, or is that just maybe a pocket of the story unfolding?
I guess it's reattuning folklore into kind of, urban myth and the stories that we each are, and we tell to ourselves and we tell to each other, and the way we represent ourselves to ourselves, and how these templates of stories look at a different angle.
Okay. All right. And now your poetry is kind of more unique, I guess I should say, than kind of some of the stuff that I've heard from other poets that have come on. They've done more kind of prose and more comedic kind of poetry. Yours is kind of almost has an air of dark to it, if I may say that.
Sure.
There's kind of like this avant-garde kind of noir thing to it.
I've heard that before.
Okay, good. Is that kind of what you aim for when you write, kind of to bring out almost the other side of things?
I don't think I can help it. It's I'm beginning from where I am, and so I'm gonna take with me everything that's already there. So I guess it's more of a revealing of the world that I am in and is informing me, and I guess I don't realize it has that effect until someone says that, or after I've been reading a very different kind of poetry, and if I'm brave enough to go back to my own, I realize there's a kind of dark heaviness to it that I think goes way, way back to childhood, to when I first began to express my experience of the world.
All right. I was about to think you were going to say I thought it goes way back to Poe, but
Oh.
we could argue that too. We'll argue that a different time. But and now when you kind of sit down and you write a poem, is it very much so you have an idea in your head, you have kind of like a story that you want to hash out, and you just kind of go and write, and then that's it? Or do you kind of have to write it out in stages and piece it together like a puzzle?
There are many different ways that it's come out. Sometimes it is like being struck by lightning, and you sit down and it flows, and I end up not changing a whole lot of it. And sometimes it can be collecting itself over years. Sometimes there's something that needs to be unlocked. Sometimes you realize you're writing a poem that you don't have the experience for, but you're seeking for that experience, or you're writing something that you've already moved past, and you have to shake it up and find another way. I think a lot of my work is probably common among most artists, is all speaking to each other, the poems, also the things I'm doing on the side, like performance art and theater, that they're all speaking to each other and informing each other.
Okay, all right. So it's very much so kind of that art community and how it all just kind of interlocks somehow.
Yes, but at the same time, although I was immersed in an artistic community in Interlochen Arts Academy, when I went to Carnegie Mellon, I was interested in meeting and experiencing students from different backgrounds, and so there was a lot of students in economics and IT and design, engineering, business, and so I actually had a lot of friends outside of my major, which I liked, so I felt connected to the world that doesn't think necessarily in art abstractions, in other abstractions for sure. And so it isn't satisfying for me to be immersed in something that can only sit inside a particular medium, or a particular mindset, or a particular community. I've often found great inspiration from feeling outside of something, feeling ostracized, feeling like I'm the only one out here, and I've got to speak into the void, from within the void. And I found that a lot of the poets that I admire and have spent a lot of time reading also experienced that too. They didn't necessarily grow up in a nurturing artistic community, least a nurturing writing community, that there was a necessity to write and create because there wasn't that much of it going around.
All right, very cool. Some insight into Kat's mind here on the 9 o'clock meltdown. And now you have 2 books out. Now, when you published Spider Country, that was kind of your first kind of pressed book that you did. Was that kind of your art? I mean, was it amazing to see your art, finally in a book? It's all completely yours, and kind of people are receiving it well. I guess of the blogs and things that I've read with you in it, everybody's like, Kat's poems are awesome, you need to go see her, she'll be here, or does this and that and the other thing. So was that kind of like, wow, I finally did it?
There was some satisfaction to it. I had been approached by a publishing house in Duluth to put a manuscript together based on a reading I did a couple years ago at Homegrown, and the project fell through, but I wanted to continue it, so I continued to put it together. And I liked being able to design the cover and the format and to pick what was going to be in it and how it, and having all the artistic control. I really like that. And so when it came together, it felt like a significant evidence of my existence, which is something that I'm constantly in doubt of. But this was something that I could hold and say, I'm here, I do exist. And although it doesn't mean as much if it doesn't actually get out there. And so hearing feedback is fun. That's more evidence of subjectivity that lasts, that travels.
All right. And now, how has your poetry been received, kind of in your own mind and kind of throughout, your travels and your experiences? I know Duluth seems to have received your poetry very well.
Do they? Yeah, I've worked and colluded with like downtown, more working class kind of punk background writers, all the way to published academic poets, like working on the Spirit Lake poetry series board.
Okay.
And so I like that it can speak to different backgrounds, different classes. There was a reading I gave at Carnegie Mellon for a celebration of Dr. King, and it was at a podium. There was a huge picture of Dr. King in the background, which was really empowering, and a large audience of whom I think I knew no one. And I read a poem, and after the ceremony, there was a gentleman who came up to me. I think he was a frat boy, and he was trembling with rage, and he said that my poem had made him feel ashamed to be a human being.
Oh.
And I had never been so flattered in my life. I'm all for that kind of reaction.
All right, sounds good. So it kind of sounds like your poetry cuts to the quick and gets people's emotions either flared or docilent, or kind of wherever you kind of want it to go. So
hopefully it does something.
Well, the mind of a poet, of a good poet, should do that. Well, a good artist in any realm should make that happen.
I hope so.
I feel. That's what I feel about art. Art should make people feel something.
I hope it makes them think, actually. I think feeling is very important, but it can often fall away as fickle as emotions can be. But to get someone thinking, to me, at this point in my life, is even more interesting and more lasting and more damaging and more inspiring, I guess.
All right. And now you have a second poetry book out, and now you were saying that this one actually got recorded in New York. Now, is that just kind of, it's going to come out on kind of like a reading tape, or what do you foresee it being used as?
I don't know what my friend Fritz has in mind, but he's a very creative man. He went to Carnegie Mellon as well, along with another good friend of mine, Brian Senti, who's a composer. And a couple years back, Brian took 5 of my poems and he composed music to them.
Oh, very cool.
And he had the MacArthur Dance Company choreograph some modern dances to it, and there was some costume design, Maya Zhang, and there was a film that was done to it as well, with Satan's Pearl Horses, one of whom was also a Carnegie Mellon alum, and it was all put on together as a multimedia extravaganza named after one of the poems called From the Margins, This Unmentioned, and it opened in Brooklyn, And 2 years later, it had a revival with the Nouveau Classical creative production team as well. And one of the composers involved in the production, Fritz, he recorded with me a few weeks ago, and I don't know what we have in mind for it, but now it's there as material to work with.
Okay. All right, very cool. And yes, the multimedia video is up on YouTube if people want to check that out. I've been watching bits and pieces of it here and there, and it's very, very avant-garde and very kind of open to interpretation, I feel. So it's very cool that they could take written words and put it to something visual, but that's what people have been doing for the past 20 years or so.
Yeah, it was overwhelming because it was like 5 different mediums all happening at once, as well as the individual artists involved, the dancers I spoke with, and the musicians, the costume designer, and they all sounded really inspired by it, and that was really intense, and watching the dress rehearsals for it was incredible. Again, it was like this overwhelming evidence that something exists in the world that I'm a part of, and that it's translating, it means something, it's comprehensive somehow. So that, I guess, is one of my greatest experiences involving my art.
All right. Very cool. Well, hopefully there are many more to come for that one. And now, do you have a poem from your other book for us?
Yeah.
I was looking at the... I'm drawing a blank this afternoon. I'm sorry, everybody. There's one about Duluth or something like that. I thought I saw.
Oh, yeah, there are several about Duluth. In this one, in the table of contents,
thank you.
Each poem is prefaced with a city. So there's Duluth, there's Traverse City, Provo, Utah, the Twin Cities, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, New York City. So are you looking for one from Duluth?
Whichever one you feel fits the bill.
Okay, let's do diplomacy. I've learned diplomacy in a small town where the feedback loop is very quick and very small. And I've also learned how inept diplomacy can be in the end. So this is called Diplomacy. Tenderness is a moment of silence where everyone gathers to speak, and the body, a better listener, takes comfort in knowing it didn't have a say. Sloppy suicides are in fashion, after all. In defense of profanity, the tongue uninspired. What's left of credentials if we're civil, like we should be? Your olive branch, the treacherous erection, can still be in good taste, though this letter of intent may not include our names. Language has not made liars of us all. Its discretion, a sermon. Binding the clauses of conversation, our gestures. Making a man finish himself in the other room is merely a figure of speech unless performed in earnest. Desire is a glittering window, and all its paperwork, a sledgehammer. Enough with the peace offerings, jackass. I'm aiming at your expectations.
And Kat here reading some of her poetry this afternoon. And once again, that poem kind of sticks it to the man a little bit there. Is that kind of a little bit of the law school days poking through?
Oh, maybe, yeah. Maybe a little bit with a lot more sarcasm and cut. Maybe a little more cruelty.
All right, sounds good. And now, kind of what's up next for you? You just got back from New York. You just recorded one of your poetry books. Not quite sure where that's going to go, but it sounds like it could be something great. You've got a multimedia thing featuring your poetry. You've got a video out on YouTube. There are a few videos of you just reading your poetry at Homegrown out if people want a visual behind all of this. What's kind of next for you? Are you going to hopefully stick it in Duluth a little bit longer or go off and see what else is out there?
Right now, I'm pursuing a master's degree at the European Graduate School in Switzerland.
Okay.
So I go during the summers, and I'm studying philosophy there.
Mhm.
And so I'm working on my thesis right now,
Wow.
which I'll turn in at the end of the summer.
Mhm.
And from there, I think I'm going to go on and do a PhD with the school. And my thesis involves alternative forms of subjectivity using the work of Alain Badiou and Braha Edinger.
Okay. All right. Well, good luck to you with that then.
Thank you.
So now, how did you get involved with the school in a different country, for that matter? Why not go to UMD or St. Scholastica?
Oh, well, this school has some of the most groundbreaking modern philosophers.
Okay.
And I had followed the work of several of them that actually teach there, and that's how I found out about the school. And so I will go where the masters go, and so that it was like it's a hotbed of thinking, and as well as students from all over the world with great substance and great pursuits and passion and wisdom, and so that sounded to me like paradise. So that's why I went there.
All right. Well, good luck once again.
Thank
To you
you.
for graduation and coming up with your thesis and things like that. Hopefully you'll be in this year's Homegrown. Are you thinking about it at all?
Sure. I guess I'd like to take part in the poetry.
All right. And yeah, just good luck to all the future poems and the poets and people that you've inspired.
Well, thank you.
Oh, of course. And Happy New Year to you as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
All right. Kat, everybody.